Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. It's great to be with you. I'm Dan Fitzpatrick.
And I'm Ben Whittaker. It's good to see you, sir. And we were just the two of us tonight. I feel like I was going to go into song then, actually, just the two of us, but I won't. Steve is in, I think he's in, did we say he's in Wales tonight and he couldn't make it on? Is that right? Or is he off to Spain? He's gallivanting somewhere, isn't he?
I don't know. I can't keep track.
He's
on a plane somewhere.
Yeah, love it. It's good to see you, mate. Are you well?
Yeah, you too, man. Yeah. All good. All busy. All my work just seems to be writing all the time at the minute. Just banging out a few thousand words here and there, and
like content writing and stuff like that.
More like applications, like college reports, applications, things like that. So it's
all the cool stuff.
Yeah, I know. Evidence gathering and
yeah. Well, to be honest, it's a good amount of my work's been about writing recently as well. So mine's been more around like copywriting. I'm working with a technology provider who is doing a bit of work around the education space and making sure they're talking about things like flipped learning and blended learning and the use of technology and stuff. So similar world, writing words and trying to make it sound right, which is the same for you, I'm guessing, in terms of writing reports for college.
Yeah, I much prefer writing like a headline than a 3,000 word document, though.
Yeah, you're good. You to be fair, you are good at that. You're good at like making it like a punchy headline, or like the newsletter one. If we ever get a good newsletter headline, by the way, if you're listening to this and you subscribe to our newsletter, it's usually Dan's. So Dan's very good at the.
We complement each other, don't we? Like, I think you're good at that as well. You're good at the longer form writing as well. Yeah, it's good. There's so much. I think just to mention, like, to people listening, to get, and I think we'll probably get into this tonight as well, to get good at a skill like copywriting or writing blogs or whatever you want to do in terms of writing, there's so much free education out there at the minute. I mean, we had Nicholas Cole on, didn't we? I'm just going to try and remember the episode number he was in. It was probably about 20 episodes ago.
Yeah.
But he like his whole business is around online education and how to copyright. And there's loads of them out there. So you literally go see what the content they're writing and teach yourself.
And there's there is you're right, absolutely loads. So I subscribe to a couple of newsletters. I think you're the same, don't you, Dan? Coming in that are talking about writing, about content, about being consistent. And it's that key. All of them say the same stuff, don't they, about consistency, writing regularly, being public facing with it all. So I'm not going to steal all their thunder or even try and bastardize it for you guys listening today. But yeah, it's good. And it feels like now we're in a position where writing for an audience has become part of our world. We've done podcasting for as long as we have, but that additional element to be able to write for an audience, even from a work perspective and from the Edufuturist stuff, is it's a good thing. And it's nice when you can do that in that persuasive stuff. It's a little bit of a different medium for us as well, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely, it is good. It forces me. I don't know about you, but I've never been great at like journaling and writing down things. So kind of, I love it when it's, because I know we do a bit of a rota, but I love it when it's my turn to write an article for the newsletter, because it just forces me at some point in the week to reflect on what I've learned over the last few weeks, what I've consumed, and try and distill it down. And I should really do that on a daily basis, just for my own personal.
Mine's there, right next to me. That's what I do the same. Just like to usually vomit of feelings or gratitude or things I'm working on. I have a couple, actually, one that's about ideas and one that's about like just getting things out of my mind that are concerning me or I'm grateful for, and that kind of stuff. So it to be honest, nobody would ever read it. These aren't like some kind of memoir. Sometimes I write them and I think to myself, I wonder if anybody will read these after I'm dead. Probably not. But I've got quite a few of them because I've got into the habit of journaling. I've fallen in and out of it for times, and I'm not kind of like religious about it. Some people are super religious about it, but I've found it's really helped from a mental health perspective as well. Just being able to get things out and remembering things you're grateful for. That gratitude journal is kind of, it sounds a little bit trite sometimes, but I find that when you start reflecting on even the little wins that you've got, the fact that your kids are healthy and the fact that you've got work. That today I managed to sign up a new contract for work, and good. It's just being able to go, do you know what? The world might be rubbish at the moment. The economy might be rubbish. The politics might be rubbish, but there's good things that you can take out of little things in a day, can't you? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
It's interesting though. You say like who will read it? Well, I think it was a few years ago. My gran got out my granddad's journal. My granddad was a journaler, and he just like wrote a couple of sentences every day, and she got it out, and I was like flicking through, and he died. He actually died the day after I was born, so I think he met me, but I obviously never knew him. And so just to have that kind of insight into someone who's so close but isn't life was absolutely fascinating. So I think there's so much value in it.
Absolutely, and even if nobody ever reads it, the value for both, even from both sides, isn't there? The value if somebody does read it, but the value. Sometimes I write in it. I think I hope somebody never reads this. but also it's cathartic, and I think it's this has become like almost a coping mechanism. I think so. I have I've always been a serial post-it person. Like for those people who are watching, I've got like literally piles of post-its of things that I've kept, and I throw them away as well. They're things.
This is the same guy who, when he does online training, tells people to do digital notes.
Yeah.
And
but I still love a paper post-it, and I hold my pen in my hand at all times because I'm always thinking. I don't know what it is. I think that's a safety mechanism, but yeah, I love it, and I think it just helps me, especially with the kind of person I am. I listened to a podcast this week actually. That's not the new bit. The new bit is it was on one of Joe Rogan's podcasts. He interviewed psychiatrist or psychologist Dr. Gabo Mate, and brilliant thinker, but he was diagnosed with ADHD in his 50s, and he wrote a book. He's written a few books, but one of them, the most recent one's called The Myth of Normal, which I thought I liked that phrase. But he's also written one called Scattered Minds. Sometimes, honestly, it started making me think it's okay that my mind is scattered. I go from one thing to the next, and you know this, Dan, probably having known me as long as you do. Some of the listeners won't, but that ability to be able to hold a few things, and if I've got a problem with remembering them, writing them down helps me with that. So yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know we would go this as an intro today.
I know it's quite interesting. I've got a leadership mentor, Nigel Carlton. Big up Nigel Carlton. He's absolutely quality, really good guy, and he really encourages. The first time I met him, he said, because I never used to write, like, because I would be like, well, I've got my laptop, I'll just open Google Keep, write a note in there, and I've got it. He really encouraged me, and I was like, you know what, I'll give it a go. I'll get a notepad. And his advice is literally every meeting you're in, whenever you're with anybody, and he's talking about like the work environment. He's like, write it down, make notes. So even if it doesn't seem relevant at that moment in time, just write it down. He said, then you need to build in an hour or two each week where you just go over everything from that week.
Wow.
And he said you'll be amazed by you'll start to pick out connections between two meetings that you thought had nothing to do with each other.
That's cool.
You'll start to pick out themes, and it's really, I mean, I haven't fully done this yet, and it's, you know what it's like when time just runs away in the week and you've got a crazy schedule, but something I keep meaning I need to build that time in to do that. And it actually touches on a great book I read recently by a guy called Diego Forte, called How to Build a Second Brain. And he essentially advocates for the whole using technology around you to kind of almost subcontract the information. It's like, because you can't keep it, and he has a whole system of how to do that. And then his whole thing is that the connections you'll start to see between different projects you're working on, and how that'll then help you to innovate or make sense of things as well. I think
that's really smart. That concept of using technology to be that second, that almost like that brain dump. It's just almost things like we can't in our working memory, we can only keep a certain amount of stuff. That's I'm no scientist or psychologist to be able to talk about that, but my own practical anecdotal experiences, if I'm trying to remember 4 or 5 different things at once, something is gonna going to get forgotten. So I'm not. We don't have a notes on the fridge, but because my wife is very particular about the kitchen. But I do have a whiteboard. There's an actual whiteboard with writing on. Next to me there, with like I've got my big hairy audacious goals on there, and the things I want to achieve. And I've also got my like to-do list up there, my big to-do list, and then my ongoing to-do list is on here, as well as I'll probably write it in other places as well. Remind myself, put reminders in my calendar and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, I see it. It's good. It's a good shout.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it probably brings us really nicely onto what we want to talk about today in terms of well, we want to. I suppose I think I've named the episode "Strategy for Life," but we want to kind of go over like what is strategy, and it kind of comes down basically to what we've just been talking about. I guess going through life, whatever you're working on, whatever you're learning, whatever's going on in your life, in a way that is meaningful, in a way that's purposeful. And I think it's so easy, isn't it? And I think since I had my two kids a couple of years ago, I've never kind of been brought into the present moment as much as I, because I've kind of always been somebody who's tried to be quite ambitious and always wanting to get onto the next thing and achieve the next thing. And it leads us. I mean, it led us to start. I know you're the same, Ben, as well, and it kind of led us to start this podcast and do all the ventures we've done together in education and with Edufuturists and a lot of other projects that we have as well, and advance our careers, things like that. But it all comes like it's always extra work you've got to put in. And since having kids, I just find it really difficult to do that, because you've got to. I mean, we were just saying before we went on live to the podcast, spend a lot of my time when I finished the day job sorting out kids' dinners and putting them to bed, and whereas normally I'd be then starting on a side project or doing other things, and it's really, to be honest, even though obviously I love spending time with my kids and I would happily do anything for them, it has kind of in a way scared me a bit, because I've always been someone who's needed to be working on something extra as well, but I found recently that I just don't always have the energy to do it at the end of the day or at the end of the working day. And it does, I think probably what scares me about it is the fact that I feel like I'm staying still a bit, just doing each day as it comes, without having an overarching, purposeful, almost meta narrative to go somewhere else and achieve the next thing. And does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm coming out the other end in terms of my kids. As we know, my kids are a little bit older than yours. But my argument is that kids are your side hustle. That's what I was thinking as you were saying. Your side hustles are your kids right now. And there's a season of life where your investment, if we use that phrase, into what you do on top of your day job is to make sure your kids are thriving. And that's like anybody who's friends with Dan on social media know that like they rarely are sat in the house at weekends or holidays, because you're wanting to give your kids experiences, aren't you? And you're taking them to places, and because they are your side hustle. And I don't mean that like as if they're not the main thing, because your kids are your most important thing, aren't they? And your partner, but like whilst you're doing your work, they're the side hustle. And I think actually, even though mine have got a little bit older than yours, Dan, I talk quite a lot about their interest. So Martha, my youngest, is really into dance. So she swims as well, but she's really into a dance. So she does 4 dance classes a week. Neve swims. In fact, that's where she is now. And she's the eldest. She's nearly 12, and she does 6 swim lessons a week, swim classes a week. Like, and then galas and championships and all the stuff that goes with it. That is almost a side hustle. And what I've kind of done, because my kids are a little bit older, is being able to do my bits of side hustle whilst they're doing that. And that's the change that flipped it for me, because I wasn't doing lots and lots of other bits of stuff, writing and bits of other like businessy type ideas and investing and things like that. But now, because I'm often sat on the side of a pool or in a dance room or sat in my car, it gives me a bit of time and space to read or listen or to plan and strategize. So, and I think as we get into the conversation tonight, I think as I was thinking about it when we were planning this, there's a famous quote that a lot of people use, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, that Peter Drucker quote. And I think strategy has had a bit of a bad name and a bad rap because, well, if we're too strategic, then we're not innovative enough, or we're not fluid and flexible and creative enough, because is strategy the opposite of creativity? And that probably come up in a conversation today. But also, it's been like the poor relation to culture. And in no way in what we're talking about tonight are we suggesting that culture isn't important. I think what we're saying, I think if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, and even all its different iterations, we talk about culture all the time. We talk about school culture being more important than the technology that you use, and coaching, and as part of your staff culture. We talk about this all the time, well-being as part of a cultural thing. But actually, culture and strategy need to work together, don't they? It's not like one is the opposite of the other. A good strategy is a cultural position. So the fact is that we so I'm a trustee at a local charity, and we have strategic goals and strategic aims. So like we have reports, and we have targets, and we have the things that go with that. But that always underpinned in the culture of trying to help people and trying to be a good force in the community. So it's not either or, is it?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I've been really reflecting on a phrase recently, that strategy is innovation. Strategy equals innovation, and that's it's come up. I think I've mentioned before, I'm doing a postgraduate diploma in innovation at the moment, and we're doing a module at the minute called Strategy is Innovation, and okay. And the main lecturer on that, a guy called Vijay Govindarajan, says that, well, strategy is all about how you want to lead in the future.
Nice.
And to lead in the future, you need innovation. To know the future, to look at the future, to have a vision for the future, to get to that future, you need innovation. So his argument is strategy is innovation. And I think when we make that argument, then it's very easy to see how strategy and culture are very much one of the same thing, dare I say it. That innovate, because innovation requires an innovative culture, really.
Yeah.
So good strategy has to have the innovative culture in order to do strategy. And I think it's also that mindset of strategy is about what happens later on. Strategy is right, and I know myself. My job title is strategic lead. So I work on strategy.
Just on that, actually, just before we started planning about this, I said, "Have you been like doing? What makes you think we should do about strategy?" Dan, because Dan suggested it. I was like, "Have you been doing some like reading about it or doing something?" And he went, "It's literally my job. It's my title, my job." Sorry, go.
No, it's good, and I think I wrote an article in one of our newsletters a few months ago about how innovation and I also kind of meant strategy really can be seen as a very ad hoc thing to do within an organization, especially in education. I think almost like, oh, we've got a moment of inspiration, let's plan for it, let's see what we can do with it. But actually it's something that we should be doing all the time and should be thinking about all the time, and actually it is about a vision into the future and detecting what's going to come and how we prepare for that. But it's not about what you do in the future. You can't go, right, well, in 5 years' time we see that virtual reality is going to become very, very popular within culture. Therefore, 5 years' time, we're going to put down on a report that we're going to start exploring virtual reality in 5 years' time. It's not something that you do. And I've been reflecting on this a minute because I'm literally writing a bit of a strategy at the moment that got its objective, its aims, and it's got a roadmap. But actually, strategy is not about what you do in the future. It's about the resources that you allocate today. Now,
okay,
you have to, because I suppose going back to before, you're only ever in the present, aren't you? You're never in the past. You're never in the future. You're only ever in the present. So whatever you look at doing in the future, you've got to start allocating those resources today. And there's numbers are thrown around in this area as well. So if you've got a team, do you spend 70% of your time on the day-to-day operational, the stuff that your bread and butter of what you're doing and what you've always done, and then dedicate 30% time and resources to strategy? And I think even that shows you, well, actually, have to start dedicating resources to it today. We have to start the building blocks. And in the course, actually, they talk about the competencies. What competencies do you need to start building within the team in order to meet the roadmap, in order to meet those goals?
It is interesting considering, like, even just the numbers that you've just mentioned there, because everybody, the famed conversation about Google's 20% time, and that idea of creating space to think about things that are not part of your normal day-to-day job is quite interesting. And you don't need to go far to find examples of activities and apps and ideas that came out of that 20% time at Google. But I think what's interesting here, before we get into like the ideas around how we build an innovative culture, because I think you're right. I do think it is an innovative culture, and whether like the culture is the foundation and or the materials that you work with, perhaps. So like we know that culture is a shared set of values and norms. That's what I taught sociology for quite a while. The idea of a culture is a shared set of behaviors and practices and norms and values, whereas the strategy then are the structures within which you build. Perhaps could be, or it could be the structure that you do build is strategic. That's the doing of. So I wonder then, thinking about this, whether to be strategic is it's been difficult in education, and it's not just in education. I think in life, being strategic, even the things of what we talked about right at the beginning, and that bit wasn't planned at all. The idea of writing things down, the fact of having a gratitude journal, the fact of writing things on a board or whatever else you do, are all based out of this idea that we don't want to settle for what is. But in education, particularly, because that's where we've spent a lot of our time, there's so much present firefighting to do that the ability to think about something different, or to even attempt something different, or to redress the things that have got, it's like you're chasing your tail, aren't you? The example I use almost all the time, and the conversations I have with staff all the time, is that I used to work at a school, and that school every 6 weeks would do a data capture. We Dan's smiling because this was our life, wasn't it? We had a data capture, and this is not just one school. This is pretty common. Every 6 weeks, every half term, there was a data capture. Me and Dan taught RE, so we would see our students maybe once or twice a week. So in a half term of 6 weeks, we'd see those students a maximum of 12 times, but with assemblies and inset days and whatever else, let's just say that's 10. We acknowledge that the last lesson before the penultimate lesson of the half term, so lesson number 9, was the assessment, because we'll have marked it, and then they'll have to done some feedback on it in that 10th lesson. So we've got 8 lessons to teach. Bear in mind that first lesson is probably some review from the stuff before, so we're getting into 6 or 7 lessons now, and then we've got to get through that phrase again, through content in that half term. Let's best case scenario. And then what do? We've got to test them and get some data and get some information, input that into a data spreadsheet, put that into a learning management system, and then into an MIS, and then do some analysis on that data. And it gives us some information probably in week 2 or week 3 of the next half term to say these students are underachieving. And then what do? We do some intervention for them. But guess what? Within 3 or 4 weeks, we're testing them again. So it's that whole process of teach, test, repeat, and it just doesn't, it has no longevity. We've talked about, and there's been conversations, I know I shared a thread between us this week about some ideas about education that actually should be a portfolio from a government perspective that isn't like linked to a political party per se, but perhaps it should be a portfolio that where somebody thinks strategically long term for maybe 15 or 20 years, or a team works for 15 or 20 years, rather than a political party comes in and says this is the new thing that we're doing. It's like it's almost like that firefighting has become the issue, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And And I guess I'm just thinking, because I remember when I was working in that school that you mentioned as well, that and they brought in, which is quite a common practice now as well, that the whole idea of postmortems and pre-mortems
Yeah.
on. So when you're teaching a scheme of work, you'd have a pre-mortem where you go, right, what did we do last time? Did it work? What didn't work? Let's amend the scheme of work so that we're improving it. Then a post-mortem to make your notes on that so you can bring it back up in
The irony that
Mm.
mortem means death as well. The scheme of work is death.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because that is, I don't think that's necessarily innovation. I don't think it is innovation, actually. I think it's creating efficiency within the existing systems, and it's
Yeah.
trying. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a good thing. It's a great thing to do. But it kind of brings me on to a great model that I've been reading about and learning about over the last few weeks and months. Again, I mentioned before, by Vijay Govinda Rajan. He's got a book called The 3-Box Innovation Method, and he talks about kind of, and obviously he's talking about from a business point of view, but he's saying any business or any organization, when they strategize or when they're working, should have 3 boxes. The first box, you have got the present, what you're doing in the present. So it's what's happening day to day. So for a teacher, it's teaching your lessons day to day. It's whatever you do, whatever you
Marketing.
organize. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything, all of that. It's your day to day. It's operational. It moves on and on. And it's the business. It's the bread and butter. If it's a business, it's what you're doing. It's what's making you money. What you're doing. And it's good to optimize that current business, to look at efficiencies for that business, to try and improve it. And I think a lot of the time we see that as innovation, as trying to improve the current way of doing things. And even just saying that, I know we could probably go down a whole track of probably how education's got into the mess that it has, by staying in box one. So, but I'll introduce the other 2 boxes because I think it'd be good to come back to that.
Yeah.
The third box, I'm going to jump the second box for a minute, is the creating the future. And VJ, he proposes that there should be a certain amount of resources and time dedicated to looking at creating the future, and there's lots of methods of how to do that. If you know anything about innovation methods, there's things like trying to detect weak signals, so essentially weak trends that are coming through. So there might be technology, policy changes coming up, disruptions to the markets, potential new routes to market, potential competitors. So anything that's got a very faint weak signal coming almost from the future. Can you see, like things like people have talked about virtual reality for a long time, AI, and they're not weak signals anymore. They're getting stronger and stronger by the day. Blockchain was once a very weak signal. Again, that's getting stronger. So what are those?
Yeah, crypto stuff, same way, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a lot of that is still quite weak. I suppose where
in the mainstream it is.
Yeah, we're into that quite a bit, so it's probably quite strong for us. But in the mainstream, it's still quite weak. So you go, right, well, what are those weak signals coming in? And what potentials impact does it have for the business, and what new products or what new services or what new way of working could we come up with and that's your, and it is that, it's like that 20% time that used to happen at Google. It's that, and if you can dedicate some of your team or even just yourself in wherever you're working to exploring that, and but it has to run parallel to box one. So you've still got to get on with that box one work because it's your bread and butter. It's what you're doing daily. So it brings in the money or brings in your wage, but also exploring. And then the second box, which is argued is the most difficult box, is forgetting the past. So when you kind of assess what you're already doing in the present, what you could potentially be doing in the future, what do you need to put into box 2 from the present that's going to get you to the future? What do you need to let go of What values and practices that fuel the current business but fail the new business do you need to let go of? And that's the difficult one, because if those values and practices are actually fueling the success of today, very difficult to let go of them to reach tomorrow.
So yeah, it's interesting. Before we went on air, we were talking about the idea of a number of organisations I've worked with, who, when I ask them why they do something, their answer is because we've always done it that way. and the phrase that is often used in a different way is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, why reinvent the wheel? All that kind of stuff. Because there's that almost that idea of death by 1,000 cuts or death by 1,000 changes. It's almost tweak. And one of the best books in education I read when I was younger was Tweak to Transform by Mike Hughes. That idea of, don't try and revolutionize everything all at once in your classroom. Tweak little bits as you go, and it will transform it. And I think there's a lot of sense in that. There's a lot of sense in, don't try and I'm gonna change. I'm gonna make everything project based, and I'm gonna stop doing any kind of instructional teaching, and I'm gonna expect the students to learn in a flip mod, and that's the only way they're gonna learn. And everything's out and a new thing's in. There's a lot of sense in tweaking rather than revolution in that sense. But I really like that idea of suggesting that critiquing what has been, and then like that selective forgetfulness, or that selective purposeful forgetfulness. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but we've got to forget things that are holding us back. So I think, from an educational perspective, and even from my own like life perspective, there's things that you have got to say, that's not good for me anymore. And from a cheesy try example, from a childhood perspective, like, tantrums are a thing you leave in the past. They worked for you in a time because they got attention, crying. Now you've got to communicate. And if you do a tantrum, and some adults have not got past that, have they? They still live in that perpetual child mode. Like, it doesn't really function in your future, does it? So you've got to forget things. But there's also, and I think this is what you're alluding to there, Dan, in that forgetting the past. And I know that we'll go around all of them three, but there's an alluding of, if it's been good, how do you forget that? Just because, what's he called? Jim Collins talks about, like, sacrificing the good for the great, and that's the most important thing. Is sacrificing. Sometimes you've got to sacrifice the good stuff for the great stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So when I used to do comedy, they used to call it "kill your babies." You can't be afraid to kill your babies. It's
Wow, that's a nice.
It's the same thing.
Like yeah, good.
It's just because I think if you become attached, I think as a comedian you can become really attached to a piece that you're working on, because it's
right. Yep.
It's worked in the past, or you're really familiar with the story, you've used it for a while.
Yeah.
But actually, if you want to get better, and if the rest of your material is getting better, and you need to be able to kill off the things that have worked for you in the past but aren't gonna.
It's like your comfy socks and stuff, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
They're really like almost like comforting, aren't they? They are comforting. And the past, the way of doing things, because there is naturally going to be an affiliation, and some of it's not wrong, to it's been this way. And I was in a school this week, and it was wonderful to see. There was a reception class teacher there, so a primary teacher who was closer to retirement than starting. So I won't suggest how old she was, but she was definitely closer to retirement than starting teaching. And she was like, "Oh, this technology stuff, it frightens me a little bit." And that's their phrase, frightens her. But I don't want to let my children down. So I've got to take a risk, and I've got to not always do things the way I've always done them. And I need to learn. And I loved that. I loved that a lady who had been teaching for a long time, she'd been in the same direction and done really well. She was well thought of. He's still having to suggest, I can't stick this way because the world is changing and the children that I'm teaching are changing, and therefore I've got a responsibility to like selectively forget, haven't I? So
yeah, absolutely. And I think yeah, it's interesting. I think I want to start applying this. I think to the education system, and
Mm,
I suppose it comes back to a tagline that we have, our kind of motto of needing a revolution
mm,
that in education. And it's interesting because um, that whole idea of having a revolution sits very uncomfortably with some people, and people tend to say, and people say it to us, don't they, Ben? But actually, do we not more need an evolution? Let's have an evolution of education, and
yeah. Even podcast guests quite regularly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
the revolution almost seems too much. But actually, when you apply the 3 box model, box 3 is revolution.
Yeah.
Like revolution is about forgetting the old ways and starting a new path, not continuing with the old path, but starting a new path. And I think it's interesting because this is really interesting actually, because I'm starting to think we've kind of, I know we talk about we've kind of over the last few years built a repository of anecdotal evidence for the need for change, and by no way are we scientific in what we do. I think we're 3 lads who have chats and conversations and build ideas. But actually, this is a real framework for a lot of what we say. This is a real actual methodology here that could underpin what we're saying. And I think because if you let's go to box 1, what we do, what we're always doing in education, we're teaching students to get the best exam results as they can, essentially, because that's when it comes down to it, a lot of what a school is measured on in terms of its success.
Oh, Dan,
How it's
Dan,
viewed.
I'm not going to leave that. I'm not going to leave that. That is my question. Just even before we go in, because I know we want to dig into that, is that should that be in box 2 rather than in box 1? So should that go into and the reason why I say that is because we've had a conversation on the podcast recently, and we've had a number of conversations together around the purpose of education. So what we are doing is we are passing knowledge and skills onto young people. That sounds like it's almost like here's a baton, take it. We're passing something on or transmitting that so that they can X, and that X could be play an active role in society, get a job, go to university, thrive in the world, blah 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 blah. It could be any of those things. Our present way of doing it, I agree, is teaching them how to pass exams. But the question is that really, is that something that we need to? I'm not saying scrap.
No, I think you're right, and I don't think we're saying different things here. I think you've got to have box 3 well on its way before you can start putting things from box 1 into box 2, don't you?
Yeah, good. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Because
then when you know where you're going, then you can start to skim off the fat, I guess, and say, right, this is stuff we don't need. But I think, but in that box 1, and it's interesting because efficiencies made to box 1, optimizing the current business, the current way of doing things. I say it's often miscategorized as innovation, and we see that a lot. Like if I say to you, who or what organizations in the English education system have become absolutely phenomenal at incrementally improving and optimizing the way things have always been done, who comes to mind? Sorry, I've put you on the spot there.
You have. There's different. I'm probably on the. I don't want to name a school. That's my challenge. It's whether you go to.
I'll tell you who does a really good job.
Yeah, Michaela.
Michaela does a fantastic job of it.
That's what came to mind. Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal job. Like I mean, if you look at their ratings, their exam results, their progress results, I've been to the school. Interesting. I saw Jordan Peterson was it Michaela a couple of weeks ago. I've visited. I've witnessed how things are done, and if you need an example of how the the current way of doing things has been optimized to the nth degree and is done so well. That is your example. And that's why I went, because I was working in a school at the time that viewed optimization of the current system as the gold standard. So I went down to have a look, see how things were being done.
It's the same thing like with Dixon's Trinity and all that kind of. They are nailing that concept of passive, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like recipients, knowledge transfer, rules, what's that? Rote learning, that exam training. They have got it boxed, and I agree with you, Dan.
Phenomenal, and it takes a culture as well to do that as well. I mean, they've got really. I think take aside if you don't agree with what they're doing, take that aside. There's some of the cultural stuff there is spot on as well, and that's how they achieve that optimization. But also step outside of education, and I've said on the past on this program, I'm a big fan of a TV show in the UK, not the One Show.
I thought that's where we're going.
But there are other areas of life that have become absolutely amazing at engineering efficiency, and that is
background design.
I'm not actually. I'm talking about In the Factory with Greg Wallace. Amazing show. Like
you love it. You love Greg Wallace.
Well, Greg Wallace, if you're from the UK or if you're not from the UK, he presents MasterChef, but he's also got a show on very Cockney. He's also got a show on BBC Two where he essentially just visits factories. It sounds like the most horrific show ever. But it's interesting because what I like about it anyway is those factories are engineered to efficiency so much because it costs them money if they don't do that.
Yep.
Like if you look at the engineering that goes into a simple bit of machinery, a lot of these factories, they don't buy off the shelf machinery. They literally engineer and design their own machinery that is bespoke to the product that they're making, so that it does it in a certain amount of time to a certain specs that they need. And if you look, like a lot of automation's doing that at the minute. So if you look at is it Ocado, where the automated conveyor belts pack the bags themselves,
who the same.
Like it's all for efficiency, for totally optimized efficiency. There's no downtime in that system. There's no sluggishness in that system. Everything is done for the time value, for the efficiency value, and because it makes more money, because it brings in a hell of a lot more money.
And if you had another example from a slightly different industry, I'm reading The Greatest by Matthew Syed, and he talks about lots of examples, but one of the things he talks about is Team Sky. And obviously in its success with Chris Froome and whatever else, that phrase and of marginal gains, and that we had that in education, didn't we? The phrase around marginal gains. How can we move somebody from a low C to a middle C, move a middle C to a high? How do you move that? And what are the incremental bits? How do you tip them over that 50% barrier to be able to get a grade 4 or whatever else it is? But Team Sky talked about even things like on the Tour de France, they took mattresses, the mattress that Chris Froome would sleep on at home, they took on tour with him, so that in every hotel he stayed in, he slept in his own mattress, on his own mattress. Like they engineered the exact amount of food and energy that was needed so that they could just little marginal gains. How much they tried to do stuff, training around just eating fats and then eating bits of carbs and when to eat the carbs and time, like literally minuscule, like the tightest margins, engineering the hell out of it. And we've done it in education, we've done it in business. It's not
there's no judgment here. It's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
It actually transforms lives. It makes people huge successes
and safety. Like the idea, you don't want a doctor to always just remember what he did we've said this example before, what he learned in medical school. Like they should be keeping up to date with it. Teachers are having to go on courses to remember about the new things that are happening, and so like that marginal gains is absolutely right.
Absolutely. So there's no judgment. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's absolutely essential. But it's something different to box 3, I think. And I think our argument And the reason why we get on the podcast every week and chat, because we essentially, our aim when we get a guest, isn't it, is to speak to somebody who's in box three, who's out there, who's doing things. And we do that because our argument is, well, actually, we haven't, as an education system, been spending enough time, if any time, creating the future, being in box three, being innovative. And actually, that's unfair because we do that. Our whole idea of our awards is to kind of celebrate those in box three, really. And we can look at like the XPs, the Agoras, Synthesis, all the ones we talk about regularly because they impress us so much because they are in box three. And I think we get frustrated, and the reason why we get on the podcast every week is because we see, right, well, actually, and we get criticism like, oh, well, actually, no, these types of exams do work. This does work. Industry still uses exam results as a benchmark, all of that, and we absolutely get that. But we're not saying that it's not important at the moment. Of course, it's important. It's part of the education system is part of the whole ecosystem of the country, the systems, the world that we live in. Of course you need that. Like, I've got 2 kids. Ben's got 2 kids. We're not going to say to our daughters and our sons, just, yeah, those exams don't matter. Like, yeah, revision. No, you don't need revision. You like nobody revises in the workplace. Don't forget about it. Like, it would be the most irresponsible thing in the world to do, wouldn't it? We're not saying that it's not valuable. What we're saying is that we need to also have our eye on box three as well, because going back to what we were talking about before, those weak signals have very much become strong signals. The Agora, the XP, the Synthesis, the Kadato schools, the online education, the decentralization of education that we talk about and we explore every week, very much becoming stronger and stronger signals. And if the current education system doesn't dedicate time to it and then start the process of moving over to box three and start killing those babies, to start using letting go of values and practices that don't then fuel the new system, then we're going to be in a mess. And some people would argue, our good friend Bob Harrison, someone like Bob, someone like David Price would argue, we're already stuck. We've already, because we haven't done the box three thinking and the box three strategy anyway for a long time, if ever, then we're actually already in a mess. And it's just a matter of time before we realize that it's all in the air. And I think we talk about that a lot, don't we? We talk about what's going to happen when, and it was a Gerd Leonhardt said that the next Google, the next big company is going to be an education provider. It's going to be private. It's going to be global. And what happens when the education system then has to deal with that? And does it go down the route of blockbusters, where
do you know that
in the face of Netflix?
That's the that was the example I was thinking about. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about Kodak. That idea of and the examples everybody talks about, aren't they? That didn't respond to the need and became relics, or jumped on the bandwagon late and weren't an early adopter. That idea around, and this isn't hype, because obviously we've regularly have talked about Gartner's hype cycle. That idea of that trough of disillusionment into that peak of expectation, and then that and that plateau of productivity. And actually the aim is to get to the plateau of we're not jumping on a hype. And sometimes when we talk about things like blockchain and Web3 and decentralization and crypto and metaverse and VR, all the stuff that actually has floated our boat recently, we acknowledge some of that will be hype, or some of the stuff in it will be hype. We've seen, and we talk about this quite a lot in our private chats, the conversation about crypto being in a bit of a difficult market at the moment, and it's a bit of a difficult time financially around the world, and particularly in the UK. Finances are really tough. So we've had hypes, and we've probably in a trough of disillusionment, but then we need that peak of peak of expectation, that anticipation of something could be different here, and then we get into that idea that the box three stuff is in that in that expectation, and actually you become higher than the original the idea and into that productivity, and then it becomes actually very, very quickly box 3 becomes box 2, doesn't it? Box 3 becomes box 1, sorry, because it just becomes the norm that you continue, and then we're going to have to streamline that, and we're going to have to tweak that again.
You have to and that's when once box 3 becomes box 1, you optimize the hell out of it, don't you? And then but then it should be a cycle, and then once you're doing that, you're working on box 3 again. I think it's really interesting, because I think that, and it goes back to the innovation is strategy type thing, and that actually your strategy isn't something that it should be. It isn't like we go, right, blockchain's going to be big, probably mainstream more in about a decade's time. So here's the plan for that. Here's the plan for this. It's broad strokes. Strategy should be broader strokes. I think a lot of people see strategy as something that should be very detailed, and by all means, you should have some idea of where you want to be and by when and how you're going to get there. But it should be a very agile environment.
Do you know what I've literally just written down, Dan? I've literally just written down the word agile.
Yeah.
And how do we get agile strategy? Like, what does agile strategy look like? Because it's almost like you have to have, like you said, broad brushstrokes. Like, let's just say we want to bring more creativity into our curriculum. Nobody in their right mind, surely nobody in their right mind doesn't want our young people, our children, to stay curious and be creative. Like I said, I've been at a couple of primary schools this week, and the excitement of watching some of them kids, how excited they get when they see a little bit of technology and it works for them, and they can do that curiosity and asking questions and why. We don't want to lose that. And just like that brilliant TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson talking about schools killing creativity and curiosity, we don't want to do that. So if we were going to say then strategy is we want to bring more creativity into the classroom, the agility within that is not to say we need to bring more, we need to then therefore do more art lessons. That's not the fit. We're saying that would be a fixed strategy, wouldn't we? What we're saying is we need to bring creativity across the curriculum. What does that look like? So it might well be that in English that you can do a little bit more work around bringing a creative writing or writing outside, or doing something a little bit off the chain, so that you're not just writing a story or a newspaper article or a journal article like you've always done. Like you might do a collaborative piece of work so that students are working on it together. And I'm not an English teacher, but it's that idea of bringing agility that's not too rigid. And obviously the opposite of agility is that rigidity, and that ability to be able to, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, that ability to pivot and shift. And, is this working for us? Sometimes we've got to push through, because we've said this about crypto, haven't we? We said it about some of the NFTs. And is this just going to drop off? We talked about that loads of stuff. And is it just going to, is it going to fall out? Maybe we need to push through, but then there will be some stuff where we've got to go, nah, it's done. So I don't know if you've seen today, Dan, that Google have discontinued Stadia, or a discontinued Stadia.
Oh, really?
Platform. Yeah, they've just announced today, which is a massive
thing about getting one as well.
It's interesting, and they've had to make that decision. And it's interesting. We've talked about this before, that sometimes Google, and not just Google, they discontinue a product that some people are like, what? That's well good. Why are you discontinuing that? Why are you not doing that anymore? But they've had to pivot for some reason, and they made a decision, because it might just be it's because it's not making money, or it's because it's not efficient enough, or because it takes too much time resource. And then it gets into the box 2 stuff, doesn't it, that we need to do, and put it into that box 2 and acknowledge that it worked for a time, but it's not always going to work.
Brewdog I've just cancelled the Brewdog and Friends scheme. I got an email the other day saying no longer doing it from this month.
Right.
So I think similar reasons. They tried it. They thought actually a subscription model to how people order beer could be the way of the future, and tried it, and it obviously hasn't worked.
Dang it, because you love Brewdog and Friends.
I know, absolutely, it's amazing.
You're gonna have to go to Tesco and
I know. Yeah, but it's something that I've had to get to grips with a lot recently, especially when you write in strategy. Because like I write strategy that then gets scrutinized heavily by executive leadership boards, and it's you've got to really develop a thick skin when that happens. When you sit around a table and CEOs and directors start pulling things apart from what you're writing, and you've got to go and patch it all up somehow afterwards and come back with another iteration. But it's part of the process, I guess. It's part of the process of how these things come about. But one thing when I was first getting my head around it was the whole idea of being very precise within a strategy. And I think there's precise and then thinking you're going to be thinking it's going to happen that way, but then there's also precise and having a rough roadmap. So I like when I was coming up with my roadmap, I had to say, right, well, what date? So is this going to be achieved? What different components are going to make up the how of that being done, and vital things that need to happen in the strategy. But I remember just thinking, we're talking about something 4 years down the line that has so many moving parts and depends on so many other things happening. Depends on so many other people within the organization actually doing their part and having vision as well, so that we can get this done. And I remember just really, really struggling with that, to the point where I went into the first few meetings and I just hadn't done it. So I just didn't see the point in it. But I think it's good. I think you need to have it, but be under no illusions that you'll have to edit it every time you go into that meeting. Every time you revisit it, it should be a live document, shouldn't it? A strategy should be a live document that is continually updated, and then realizing just what we're saying, like, actually, you know how we said seems to be a weak signal from crypto or blockchain within education. Actually, it's not as strong as we thought here. And there's other things going on, or it might actually be something that's got to help, like AI, for example. AI has been a weak signal in education for a long time, and although we do have some machine learning elements coming into education, full on AI is still very much something down the line. So you can't just go, right, oh, here AI robots are going to be interested in, well, on my strategic plan, in 5 years time we're going to have robots teaching in the classroom. It's just, you can put it down, but you're going to have to change it very quickly because the technology's not going to be there. So you've got it,
particularly general AI, isn't it, as opposed to specific AI, or that's what we're talking about there.
Yeah. And just as an example, it's just that you've got, I'm just trying to make that same point you made about being agile and having to change. And I think that's part of the culture, isn't it? It's been part of that. We talk a lot about teaching our students these types of skills because they're going to be working in an environment that technologically and culturally changes so often over the next few decades. And how are they going to have the skills to be able to do that and to be able to independently learn and into the future and pivot and be agile in their careers? But actually, as organizations, we need to have that baked in as well.
Yeah, I agree. And it underpins that. It's underpinned by that phrase as well. We talk about prediction. We're not particularly good at predicting the future. Like we've said that, we've said that before. But also, we often overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 10 years. That's that phrase that a lot of people talk about. Like, I'm going to do this, and I write every January. I write down my goals for the year, and this is what I'm going to achieve, and this is what I'm going to do. And very rarely do I get it all done. And often by end of January, I've thought, oh, bloody hell. I was going to go to the gym every day in January. I haven't done that. I was going to eat less than 2,000 calories every day. I haven't done that either. So it's very, very, very easy to realize that we often overestimate. And
I think you made a good point. Before we move on, I think you made a good point in that it's actually about what you do. Like, it's not. I just remembered a Peter Kay joke there. I'm not going to say it because I can't remember it fully. But like, in fact, I'll paraphrase it. The gym's not going to come down the road to you, is it? Like, oh, look, here's the gym coming towards you. Looks like it's time to tick that one off the list. You've actually got to get off your arse and go to the gym yourself. And I think that's when we look at strategy, okay, something we notice a weak signal and we want to integrate that into whatever we're doing in the next few years. But actually, you've got to make the future happen. It's not going to come to you. Now, sometimes that might not be feasible, might not be the most attractive option for your business at that time or your organization. But you've actually got to create the future. It's not just something where you're going to go, there's certain things coming along. Let's wait for it to happen. And I suppose that's where it comes to that what I said earlier about strategy is not what you do in the future. It's about how you allocate your resources today, because you need to start creating it today, or begin that process.
So I wonder then, just as we kind of start thinking about wrap, because we know that will happen. We'll wrap this, and we'll say we're going to wrap it, and this we could go on and on and on, because I think there's loads in this. I think we've just scratched the surface. But what do we think this means then in terms of from an education perspective, and like a teacher on the ground, or a person who's listening to this who's working in IT or whatever else, or you might be a subscriber to the newsletter and you've picked this up and you're thinking, well, what would it look like, or what could it look like if we start creating the future? And what kind of things can we start with? And I wonder, this is I know I asked a question and I'm starting to answer my own question, and I'll throw this out there, but whether we need to pick something in education that we need to, this is interesting. Do we start with, you said earlier about starting with box 2? No, starting with box 1 about the present and engineering the efficiencies, and then thinking about box 3, and therefore, because we're going to box 3, forgetting about box 2, yeah, or dealing with what's in box 2.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we need to do a stop? I know we can't stop education, you can't stop business, you can't stop life, but almost like a pause and go, this isn't working, so actually we're talking about box 2, or is that actually talking about box 1? I don't know. I'm tying myself in knots, but what I'm saying is, where do we start?
Yeah, I think from what I know about this method anyway, and the approach that I'm taking is, it has to be parallel, doesn't it? Because again, that box 1 is vital. So we can't go, if you work in education, you can't go, well, actually, screw it. We're only going to teach the kids on a Tuesday and Thursday, and the rest of the days we're gonna do some brainstorming sessions. Like, you can't do that. You've got to, the kids have got to come. The learners have got to come to school. They've got to come to college. They've got to be taught. You've got to carry on. But it's how do we? And I suppose it takes creative leadership, doesn't it? How do we get time to be able to work on those other things? And I think what's important is, and I think a lot of companies almost outsource innovation. So it's like, well, actually, we'll get somebody in, we'll create a role. And to be honest, to a certain extent, my job is a bit like that in my place. And I suppose it's my job, instead of going, right, well, that digital innovation is my job. It's actually, no, it's my job to instill it in everybody in the organization. It should be everybody from the person who serves food in the cafeteria to the CEO's job to be innovating, and to somehow build into their time processes where they can look at box 3. They can start, because because also if it's just leadership's job in an organization to look at innovation, you don't know. You're not on the ground. You don't know where true box 3 is, really.
But sometimes it's also such a well-oiled machine that we're not really dealing with. So, like, it may well be, and I don't know this, but it may well be that schools that are getting really good exam results, the turnover of staff is high, or their staff well-being or student well-being is low, or they might be getting really great results, but destinations data for these students who end up at university, the dropout rate might be, I don't know, and I'm not even suggesting that that's the case. But what sometimes you don't know what you don't know, as Steve says. If you're not aware of that, you've got to get a level of awareness, and sometimes that ability to put your head above the parapet. I remember I started working at a college. I was asked to come in. Exact words were, I need you to disrupt this. You're a disruptor. Literally, that's what I was given that mantle by the person who brought me in and said, I need you to disrupt some stuff because you're going to do some, you're going to make us think differently. Great. So I started going and doing that disruption, went into loads of places and fell out with loads of people, or they fell out with me because I'm saying, this doesn't work. What are you saying that for? We've done this forever. It's always worked. Look, at we were a £30 million organisation. I was like, yeah, do we want to be a £50 million organisation or not? Do we want to be the lead? Do we want to continue our standing state? Or what do we want to do? Start disrupting. And actually, as I left the organisation, the phrase that was used were, you're too much of a maverick. By the same person who brought me in to do disruption, he said, you are too much of a maverick. And I think to myself, wow. Or is education really ready for disruption? So, like, is there anything not on the table? Discrete subjects, does that need disrupting? Exams, does that need performance tables? Like,
I think it's interesting with education, isn't it? Yeah. I think yeah, it's something I have been thinking about recently, and that the ecosystem that the education system is in, kind of, it rewards that optimization of box one.
Yeah.
And it continues to reward it. And there's not really a reward, whereas in business, making manifest box 3 is highly rewarding because you've got competitive advantage over your competitors. You've got a novel product or a service.
Yeah.
It's hugely rewarding, massively rewarding. However, it's not really rewarding in education. I think that's so. Why would you want to do it? Why, when optimizing the current system, is almost the glass ceiling, in a sense. Why would you? And I suppose, in places that have, let's say XP, for example, in Doncaster, and they've got one in the northeast now as well of England, and they have innovated. They've also done it within the system as well. So it's interesting how they have done that. And
well, I read some stuff about there was a I'm gonna ruin this because I've not got the full details. I was looking at it while you were looking for it while you were talking. Then I read an article about a guy who there was a new piece of crypto, or there's a new there was an exchange, and there was a new feature on it, and this guy hacked into it and basically found a way to be able to transfer what would have been about $450 million to himself in the back end in this new fandangled bit part of this crypto exchange. And rather than stealing the 450 million, which he could have done, he let them know that he let them know that this was broken and they need to fix it. And they gave him a reward, which ended up being about $550,000 as opposed to $4. Now, that was a bold move because he could have stolen that and probably found a way to move it without it. These crypto guys can make things happen in different worlds, can't they? But ultimately, if you think about that principle behind, and what I'm trying to say here is that in that, the risk that you have in changing stuff and living in that box 3 world, or not just over engineering, it does reward like the people that carry on doing the same thing and have always done the same thing, and do it and get better at doing the same thing. I think that's
and it also, I think I don't know if you're saying this or not, but I think what I picked up from what you're saying as well there is that it might not be rewarding in terms of schools or college success in the traditional sense, but it is rewarding in the way you're going to change the lives of your students.
Yeah,
like if you look at if you look at XP, I don't think they give a shit about Ofsted ratings and all of that. I mean, they do really well because they're still maximizing the outcomes of their students. They do really well, but I'm sure when we know the guys there, I don't think they really give a shit about Ofsted. They give a shit about giving a wholesome education that's innovative and prepares prepares their students for the next steps in terms of employability skills, thinking skills, and creativity. That's their reward. And I
And that,
suppose,
and that's that in a sense. That is that 500,000 to versus the 450 million, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
that
yeah,
almost like the whole, but in meaningful terms, that 500,000 is worth so much more, but it's not rewarded in this. So perhaps the bit that we need to consider is what, like, it's that rewarding of risk taking, like mitigated risk and planned risk, but let's do things a little bit. And I've seen some wonderful head teachers that have given some freedom. And the head teacher at the school who's retiring, where I'm chair of governors there, he's given some loads of creative license to his staff and said, you run with this. You want to run with it, I'll back it. I'll give you some budget for it, and I'll let you do something slightly different. And if it doesn't work, well, we learn from it. If it does work, then we all celebrate it, don't we?
yeah.
And I've just done his appraisal last week. He's a wonderful man, and he just said some work they've been doing on special educational needs. And the two women that are leading that, he's giving them all the glory and giving them all the accolades, but he's helped make that happen. He's not done it himself. So it's almost like perhaps we need a little bit more altruism, or a little bit more something a little bit deeper, because from leadership and from the system. But let's call a spade a spade. It wouldn't be right for us to talk on a podcast like this without talking something political. That's not the way the political system is working in either any of the parties recently. Is the idea of rewarding that level of or lack of selfishness, if that's the right word, but that other thought, that thinking of others and wanting the best for others, and rather than just looking after yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because that's helped me clarify really where is the reward for box tree thinking in education. And I suppose it's where the reward should be in education. It's not about satisfying or pleasing the external
Bodies and authorities and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the student at the end of the day, isn't it? It's about them.
Yeah. And do you know what's interesting? Just as you're saying that, that's it makes it really sad that lots of people end up stepping out of education to work on education, because working in it isn't, like, we don't reward teachers. We don't. Their pay isn't good enough. They might get good. It's not. We don't treat it in the same way, with its same level of professionalism, and they're not. We don't trust teachers. We question everything they do, and understandably, it's an important role. But in that sense, there's almost a we're missing the point. And why don't we reward innovation rather than having to leave education and go and work in the corporate world to be able to make decent money? Like, and after, or let's also call a spade a spade. If you are a great teacher, you are going to get promoted, that Peter principle, to the level of your incompetency, and actually you'll end up getting promoted, and the thing that you were really good at, teaching kids, doesn't pay enough, and so you have to go into management, and you end up then stop teaching kids because you're doing management. And why don't we pay teachers really, really well? The ones that are at the top of the game, the ones that are making a real difference, the one who are helping the students do things beyond just getting exam grades. That'd be innovative. That would be revolutionary, wouldn't it?
And it would be, and I think some people would say, just to think of the counter argument, because I would, this is what I would have said probably to this a few years ago, that actually, well, we're almost getting into the area of what's ethical and what's not ethical here in terms of education. But actually, I think some people, in fact, a lot of people will probably say, well, you are doing the most for the student by getting them the best exam results, because then you're improving their chances afterwards. However, I think probably if that's your sole aim, it's not working, because look at the masses of mental health issues,
Yep.
the stress that students are under because of because of exams literally starting pretty much. A lot of schools don't like to verbalize this or say it out loud, but they start preparing for exams in year 7.
Yep.
Of course they do. And once a few schools start doing it, all of the schools start doing it, and they might not say they're doing it, but they are doing it.
Yep.
And so you've got an 11-year-old who's starting to be pushed towards an exam they're not going to take for 5 years. And then it comes down to that 3-hour exam hall, like we talk about a lot of the time, and it is like, and I remember I worked in a school once where it was regularly told to students that 3 hours in that exam hall is what you've spent 5 years working towards. This is the pinnacle of that. And that pressure we put on, it's not. So although you can make the argument, well, actually, the most moral thing to do for a student and best thing to do for a student is to make sure they get that grade 9 or A star or whatever. Actually, at what cost? I guess at what cost?
Absolutely, and we all know that a lot of people who do well in life, and I know this is again anecdotal, a lot of people who do well at life haven't got great exam results, and people who've got great exam results sometimes do really well. So there is
just look at Jeremy Clarkson.
It is. Let's be honest. There is some correlation between that. We know that, but it's not the only measure. And I remember, and I'm saying this as a parent now, not anything else. And a parent of some. Bear in mind, like I've said this before, some of the grades I got when I was teaching, like, were phenomenal. Like I managed to smash out more A stars than anybody else in the school at the time. So I'm not like I'm degrading it. But what really mattered to me as a parent when I got my children's report was, yes, they're doing well. Yes, they're beyond expected. Yes, their efforts, this and that and the other. But when a teacher writes, Martha is kind, and the other children want to be around her, and she's helpful, and she's always trying to look out for the underdog, that matters more to me as a parent. When somebody's saying to me about Neve that she's thoughtful and she's obviously very sensitive and she's aware of other people's needs, wow. That will do as much for her in life. Maybe not get her as much money, maybe not get her the best place at university, but I was just saying before we went on air again, we didn't have that long of a conversation, but it feels like we did. We had a survey today from a guy from the Office for National Statistics about crime survey. You can say, where's he going with this? They also interviewed Neve, as my 11-year-old, to ask her about her experiences of crime, and she said one of the questions asked her about whether she felt like her life was purposeful. Like, so, and it tied into the conversations about crime. Out of 10, how much do you feel like your life is worth something and purposeful? She said 10 out of 10. Now, I would take my right arm for that. And I don't know a parent in the world who wouldn't want that to be said. And that is not just about excelling in school. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think we could go into all sorts, couldn't we, Dan?
Yeah, I think I find it. I think it's interesting. It probably links back to the last few podcasts we've had, where that whole we're talking about where's the reward and how it's different for businesses. Actually, if education providers start becoming private organizations more and more, like when we talked with Garrett from Sora a couple of weeks ago, that they're businesses. Synthesis is a business, and actually they're raising. They go through seed funds where they raise millions and millions because people believe in their vision, and I think that merging of those two worlds of where's box 3 going to be, where's the value in it? It is the student, of course it is, and I think they would say it is, but also that business success is going to come with that eventually. I think if this is the way education's going, I think it's interesting because one of the areas I thought we might spend probably more time or a bit longer talking about tonight as well is where does this type of strategic 3-box thinking almost work in life and as well, not just in education, not just in business, but are we? And I think it goes back to what the question that your daughter was asked there, like the purposeful life.
Yep.
And for me as well, and I could be wrong, and I know this is different for everyone, but I think applying this kind of strategic thought to your life can give it a lot of purpose. And I think it goes back to the very start of the show when I'm talking about just doing the day-to-day things, and how do you make life better? How do you learn new skills? If you want to kind of pivot into a newer area, how do you what do you start creating for yourself? We talked about side hustles a lot, didn't we? Like, if you're going to start creating something new for you, your own business, a different skill, so you can go into another type of job because you're more interested in it, or if you just want to start doing something, just not necessarily for a profit, but just something because you're interested in it, in terms of being creative, that actually that's going to come into the box 3 way of thinking, isn't it? And it's going to be difficult, and anyone who's done this type of thing, it knows it's difficult, because you've got to get home from your day job and then work on it on an evening, or work on it on a weekend, and build that up until you can eventually move over to it. And I suppose I know both of us have had quite a bit of experience in this type of thing, probably you more than me recently, in terms of you moving and to being kind of full-time self-employed and working for yourself, and I know you're somebody who very much models kind of this 3-box way of strategizing when it comes to your life as well, because you've built that up over the last few years. You've worked in evenings, you work on the weekends, and you've built up those extra skills, that extra knowledge set, and then being able to move from box 1, put some things in box 2, and start living box 3, I guess.
Yeah. My life is that, and I'm it's only recently that I learned about this model, but really, having to say no to some stuff. Ultimately, it's a sort of art of saying no, isn't it? It's that ability to say no. That's the that's almost like the key bit about box 2. Is like, what can't I do? So I'm having to say no to some stuff, and then to be able to say yes to other things. And I've had to do that, and yeah, interestingly, we could certainly get into this in terms of it might be for a future podcast, but the idea, even from like marriage and relationships and that kind of stuff, you've got to say no to some stuff in order to be able to say yes to this, to fully say yes to this. And I have had to do it with my work. Like, I've learned skills about online presentations, and I've learned skills about finances and managing that, and not just, oh, brilliant, I got an invoice that's been paid, and well, what can I spend it on? Well, no, you need to put some away from your tax. Like, I'm having to learn things on the fly all the time, but that has required me to just think, I need to stop doing this, or I need to do more of this, and actually, where do I want to go? And then big, airy, audacious goals that are up there, not everybody's going to see them, but I would love. I've got things that I would still love to do that are sat in that box 3 of where could this be? What could we do differently? And they'll only go into they're almost like in a on the shelf, and before they go into a box, aren't they? If you've got an idea, if you don't do anything with it, which is where you started with, Dan. You talked about that idea about innovation being strategy, and it's about action, it's about doing things, and actually you've got to bring it into what you want to do. And it's all right making nice lists, but if you're not going to go and do anything with it, you've got to maybe put them into a box that's for another time. And I've had to do that. So we've talked about NFTs, we've talked about crypto, like, I'm doing bits of all them things, but they aren't. I wouldn't think that they're in my box 3 at the moment.
But I think you can almost put headings in box 3, can't you? It doesn't mean you're in the way to transitioning over to them necessarily, but it's the. I mean, we've done that. We blockchain and crypto. We've really got into, and NFTs, like you say, and that whole side of technology, metaverse, and it normally feeds back into this podcast, really, doesn't it? Yeah. When we do that, and it's because we're on a night time. We're reading articles on our phones. We're listening to podcasts. We're investing a bit of time, not all the time, but probably a bit of time, 20% time, into learning about new things. And when I say, when I kind of named this episode "Strategy for Life," I think it's not just personal life. Although I think what you said about relationships is interesting. I'd love to come back to that. And it's not just personal life. It's not just work life. It's your learning as well, isn't it? And I suppose that's how. And I suppose you could probably say the learning is the important one, because whatever learning components you're putting into that box 3 then has the implication to create things in box 3 that become your new work, that impacts the value of your relationships. Yeah, it's fascinating, I think, and it's stuff we do, isn't it? It's like, I know you said I've only learned about this methodology in the last couple of months, but it's nice to have that framework. Interesting when you said there about like your relationship with your partner, and actually, that old adage of, well, your relationship when you first meet is not, you won't have the same relationship 10 years in to the relationship you have 20 years in to the relationship you'll have when you're an old couple. And I suppose you've got to do this as a relationship, haven't you? Because if you just continue business as usual every single day, something's going to give. It's not, the old way of being with each other has to move on. And that, a lot of that is evolution, isn't it? It's optimizing what you do and creating and getting better incrementally. But actually, sometimes you need to think, actually, we're going to try something radical here.
Do you know what, Dan? I think when I mentioned it, I probably didn't fully formulate, and I still haven't. But like, definitely. So you need to, currently in our world, personally at home. So I'd gone down a career level and was working my way up through the education system, and was doing. Amanda was doing a job. She was doing well in it, but she wasn't looking for promotion and she wasn't moving that way. She then went into the police and is now doing particularly well in the police, and it's changed our dynamic. So like, I'm self-employed and I've got flexibility. I can pick the kids up and do this and that and the other, so that Amanda can throw herself into her work. That was my world for a time, and now we've tweaked the way we've gone. But actually, that's quite innovative, because we've said Manda's now going to fly that and push on her journey, and I'll do my self-employment stuff, and it works really well for us as a family. So, but even just like relationally, I've talked about this, I think, on podcasts before. Like, I have a big thing about understanding love languages and understanding what works for people and how to communicate with people. And I know that for Amanda, her love language is quality time. So I can buy her all the nice flowers and the nice bags in the world, and I can try and do the physical touch thing, all the things that a lot of people, but actually what she needs is me being there and being present. So I regularly just put my phone on the side and I'm just there. And she might be on her phone, we might be sat watching TV, but I'm present more than I've ever been. And that has forced some change in terms of that. But even things like doing things, everybody raves about this date night concept, and we don't do it quite as much as we'd like to, but like we've tried to be strategic about that. Amanda came to a concert, like music, like, she's not into music like I'm into music. I love music, but because she knows it's my thing, she'll come with me or something. She talks to me about Google. She talks, like, she shows an interest in the Edufuturists stuff. I know Julie's the same for you, isn't she? Like that that it's not their world. They're not interested in it, but they show interest in it because we are interested in it. Yeah, and applying the innovation stuff is would be quite interesting to do. But certainly the box 2 stuff is definitely the bit from an innovation perspective, and just saying, I can't do that anymore. I've got 2 kids. I remember saying to Amanda a few weeks ago, I'm like, they're bloody taking all our time. We're out at all these events all the time. Where's the time for us? Where's the time for me? And like, well, that's my side hustle for this time. And like you were saying, where's my time? It's our side hustle, isn't it? So yeah,
absolutely, yeah. It's interesting. I love this, and I think it's something we'll probably revisit from time to time. And it's definitely a framework. Now that it's in my head, and it's something that I can't help but apply to many areas of my life now.
I like it. I do like it.
Yeah, Be class. I've enjoyed this episode. It's been good. Good chat.
It's been an hour and a half of a chat with no guest. With very little plan in terms of like we're going to mention this, and this, but it's been good, hasn't it? It's been good, and I think it is a framework that we will come back to. It's probably going to make its way into some conversations around what we do as Edufuturists and how we do that. So yeah, watch your space on that. I think it's been a good one. It's been a good one.
Absolutely, yeah. If you like it, if you're interested, there is that book by Vijay Govinda Rajan. So check that out. And let us know what you think. Let us know what you think about these ideas. How's this type of thing impact and can you see it in your life? We'd love to hear from people who listen and read our stuff and like to reflect with them on all of this. So yeah, get in touch with us. We're on YouTube. If you might have noticed on YouTube we're just putting some select videos on there at the moment, almost as a highlight reel. But if you still like to listen to the video of this, it'll be on Spotify. So the video will now exclusively be on Spotify.
We've got an exclusive partnership with Spotify.
Yeah, we wish. Yeah, and I know the statistics tell us that the overwhelming majority of our listeners are listening via podcast. So you're probably a wise decision. You don't have to look at our mugs for an hour and a half. But yeah, the video is on Spotify if you want to check that out. Let us know you're listening. We always like to hear who's out there, who's listening, and yeah, you could even be a potential guest someday. So just let us know.
Info@edufuturists.com. Yeah.
Whoa, we just said that at the same time.
Boom! That was spooky, wasn't
it? Yeah, edufuturists.com, Twitter @edufuturists, and yeah, watch this space because we're delving into box 3 and who knows what's on the horizon.
Absolutely. It's been good, Dan. Yeah,
man. Take care.
You too, mate.
This is where the awkward pause is, where I find the outro video.
1, 2